The rain hammered against the windows of the Meridian Concert Hall like desperate fingers tapping for entry. Each droplet a tiny percussion in nature's chaotic orchestra. Inside, beneath crystal chandeliers that caught and scattered light like frozen fireworks, 200 of Chicago's most influential citizens gathered for what they believed would be another predictable charity gala. They had no idea they were about to witness the unraveling of one man's empire and the resurrection of a forgotten legend. Elena Vasquez, 42 years old, with calloused hands that betrayed years of manual labor, pushed her maintenance cart. Through the service corridor, the wheels squeaking in a rhythm that matched her accelerated heartbeat. She had been working at the Meridian for only 6 weeks, invisible to the glamorous crowds that swept through its marble halls. A ghost in gray uniform navigating between worlds she once knew intimately. "Watch where you're going." The voice cut through the air like a whip crack. Elena had accidentally bumped her cart against the Italian leather shoes of Gregory Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Industries and the evening's primary sponsor. At 63, Gregory carried himself with the kind of arrogance that only generational wealth could cultivate. His silver hair perfectly coiffed, his tuxedo worth more than most people's annual salaries. "I'm terribly sorry, sir," Elena murmured, keeping her eyes downcast, her voice barely above a whisper. But inside, beneath the submissive exterior, something stirred a memory of a time when she commanded attention with a mere lift of her hand when audiences held their breath, waiting for her next note. Gregory's eyes, cold and calculating as a predator sizing up prey, swept over her with disgust. "You people," he sneered, loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear, "have no sense of propriety. How they even let someone like you work in a place of such cultural significance is beyond me." The words hung in the air like poison. Several guests shifted uncomfortably, but none spoke up. This was Gregory Whitmore, after all, a man who could destroy careers with a single phone call, who sat on boards that determined the fate of half the city's cultural institutions. "Father, please," a voice intervened. Daniel Whitmore, 28, emerged from the crowd, his face flushed with embarrassment. Unlike his father, Daniel carried himself with quiet dignity, his eyes holding a warmth that seemed almost foreign. "In the Whitmore lineage," she apologized, "there's no need." Gregory's voice rose, drawing more attention. "Your bleeding heart will be the death of this family's reputation, Daniel. These people need to understand their place." Elena's hands tightened on the cart handle, her knuckles white beneath brown skin that had once been pampered and protected, now weathered by years of survival. She knew she should walk away, disappear into the shadows where she'd hidden for the past 18 years. But something about the young man's intervention, the genuine discomfort in his eyes, made her pause. "Actually," Elena said, her voice finding a strength she hadn't used in years, "I understand my place perfectly, Mr. Whitmore. The question is whether you understand yours." The hall fell silent. Even the rain seemed to pause in its assault on the windows. Gregory's face transformed from pale surprise to deep crimson rage in seconds. "What did you just say to me?" Each word was precisely enunciated, dripping with threat. Before Elena could respond, fate intervened in the form of Margaret Chen, the Meridian's artistic director, a woman in her 50s whose sharp eyes missed nothing. "Mr. Whitmore, we're about to begin the evening's program." "Perhaps we could." "No," Gregory interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to having every whim indulged. "I want this ... person removed immediately." In fact, his eyes gleamed with sudden malicious inspiration. "I have a better idea." He strode to the center of the main hall, his voice booming. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention? We have here a member of the maintenance staff who seems to believe she belongs among us." He gestured dramatically toward Elena. "I propose a wager, a bit of entertainment to start our evening." The crowd gathered, some eager for drama, others visibly uncomfortable with the turn of events. Alina remained frozen, her mind racing between flight and fight, between maintaining her carefully constructed anonymity and facing whatever humiliation Gregory had planned. Tonight's gala features a performance competition among our city's finest amateur pianists. Gregory continued, his smile sharp as broken glass. If this ... janitor ... can play even a simple scale on that Steinway grand piano, I'll donate an additional $1 million to tonight's charity. But when she fails on, she will fail. She must leave this building immediately and never return. That's enough, Father. Daniel stepped forward, his voice firm. This is cruel and unnecessary. Cruel. Gregory laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. I'm offering her an opportunity. Isn't that what your generation always demands? Equal opportunity. He turned back to Alina. Well, will you take the challenge, or will you admit you don't belong here? Alina felt the weight of 200 pairs of eyes upon her. She could see the expectations in their faces, some hoping for entertainment, others for her humiliation, a precious few seeming to silently plead for her to walk away. But beneath her maintenance uniform, her heart beat with a rhythm she hadn't acknowledged in 18 years, a tempo that once accompanied standing ovations at Carnegie Hall, that had earned her the title of the most promising classical pianist of her generation before a single night changed everything. I accept, she said, her voice carrying a resonance that made several people lean forward involuntarily. Gregory's smile widened. Excellent. Ladies and gentlemen, prepare yourselves for but, Alina interrupted, causing Gregory to pause mid-gesture. I have conditions of my own. The audacity of her interruption sent whispers rippling through the crowd. No one interrupted Gregory. Whitmore? No one. When I succeed, Alina continued, emphasizing when with quiet confidence, you will not only donate the $1 million, you will also publicly apologize for your prejudice and establish a scholarship fund for underprivileged musicians. A real fund, Mr. Whitmore, not one of your tax shelter shells. Gregory's face darkened. You dare to hold you accountable? Alina replied, her voice steady as bedrock. Unless, of course, you're afraid that your prejudices might be proven wrong in front of all these witnesses. It was a masterful manipulation, and everyone knew it. Gregory had been cornered by his own arrogance, trapped between backing down and potentially facing humiliation. The rain outside intensified, drumming against the windows like an audience demanding the show begin. Fine, Gregory spat. But when you fail, you don't just leave. You get on your knees and apologize to everyone here for wasting their time. And I want your full name so everyone knows exactly who to blacklist from every cultural institution in this city. Alina nodded slowly. Agreed. As she walked toward the piano, each step measured and deliberate, memories flooded back with overwhelming intensity. She remembered her last performance 18 years ago, when she was 24 and the classical music world lay at her feet. She had just signed with the most prestigious management company in the world, had concerts booked in Vienna, London, Tokyo. Then came the accident. Not a car crash or dramatic catastrophe, but something more insidious, a neurological condition that struck without warning during a performance, causing her left hand to seize and spasm. The specialists called it focal dystonia, a career-ending condition for a pianist. The insurance companies called it a pre-existing condition and refused coverage. The music world, cruel in its perfectionism, simply forgot she existed. She had lost everything in 6 months. Her savings depleted by medical bills, her sponsors disappeared, her so-called friends in the industry vanishing like smoke. She learned what it meant to be invisible, to go from magazine covers to job applications, from standing ovations to standing in unemployment lines. "The piano awaits," Gregory announced with theatrical mockery. "Perhaps our cleaning lady needs help finding middle C." Laughter rippled through parts of the crowd, but Alina noticed not everyone was amused. Daniel Whitmore looked physically pained, and Margaret Chen watched with an intensity that suggested she sensed something others had missed. Alina reached the piano. A magnificent Steinway Model D, its ebony surface reflecting the chandelier light. Like a dark mirror, she ran her fingers along its edge, feeling the familiar smoothness, inhaling the subtle scent of polish and aged wood that had once been her daily perfume. "Any time now," Gregory called out. "Or are you reconsidering?" Alina sat down, adjusting the bench with the precise movements of someone who had done this thousands of times. The hall fell silent except for the rain's persistent rhythm. She placed her hands on the keys, feeling their cool familiarity, and in that moment, she made a decision that would change everything. She wouldn't just play a scale. She would play the piece that had destroyed her career, Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3. It's considered one of the most technically demanding pieces in classical repertoire. But more than that, she would play it with the modifications she'd developed over 18 years of secret practice. Adaptations that worked around her condition while maintaining the piece's emotional intensity. The first notes rang out, clear and powerful, slicing through the silence like a blade through silk. The reaction was immediate and visceral. Several people gasped. Someone dropped a champagne glass, the crash barely audible over the music that began to fill the space. Elena's fingers flew across the keys with a precision that spoke of decades of training. But it was more than technical skill. Each note carried emotion, pain, loss, defiance, hope, creating a narrative without words that held the audience captive. Her left hand, the one that had betrayed her all those years ago, moved with careful control. Using techniques she developed through years of physical therapy and stubborn determination, Gregory's smirk dissolved into confusion. Then shock, then something approaching fear. He recognized excellence when he heard it. He'd been a patron of the arts long enough to know the difference between competent playing and genius. This was unquestionably the latter. "My God," someone whispered. "She's incredible." Margaret Chen pulled out her phone, discreetly recording. She'd been in the classical music world for 30 years, and she recognized not just talent, but something more: a story, a comeback, a resurrection as Alina reached the piece's climactic passage. Tears began streaming down her face, but her hands never faltered. This wasn't just a performance. It was an exorcism of 18 years of hiding, of shame, of accepting less than she deserved because the world had told her she was broken. Daniel Whitmore stood transfixed, his eyes never leaving Elena's face. He saw in her expression something he'd never seen in his father's world: authentic passion, real struggle, genuine triumph. He found himself moving closer to the piano, drawn by something he couldn't name. The music built to its final crescendo, Elena's whole body moving with the rhythm, her gray maintenance uniform incongruous with the majesty of what she was creating. Then, with a series of chords that seemed to shake the very foundation of the building, she finished, her hands lifting from the keys in a gesture that was part exhaustion, part victory. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, starting from the back of the hall, applause began. First one person, then another, then the entire room erupted. People rose to their feet, some crying, others shouting, "Bravo!" Even the waitstaff, who had stopped to listen, joined in. The ovation. Gregory remained seated, his face ash-gray, his hands gripping his champagne glass so tightly it seemed likely to shatter. He knew he'd been not just beaten, but obliterated, his prejudices exposed and shattered in the most public way possible. "Ladies and gentlemen," Margaret Chen stepped forward, her voice carrying over the applause. "I believe I can solve the mystery of what we've just witnessed." She looked at Alina with recognition and respect. This is Alina Vasquez, formerly Alina Kovac, winner of the Van Cliburn International Piano Competition, youngest recipient of the Avery Fisher Prize, and before. Her disappearance 18 years ago considered the future of American classical music. The revelation sent shockwaves through the crowd. Everyone in that room knew the name Alina Kovac. Her disappearance had been one of classical music's great mysteries, spawning countless theories and speculation. "That's impossible, Gregory," stammered, standing unsteadily. "Alina Kovac is right here," Alina said, standing and facing him directly. "Changed name, changed circumstances. But the same person you just tried to humiliate based on nothing more than the color of my skin and the uniform I wear." "I didn't." Gregory fumbled for words, his usual eloquence deserting him. "You didn't what?" Alina stepped closer. "Didn't mean it. Didn't think someone who looks like me, who works a maintenance job, could possibly have value beyond serving your drinks and cleaning your messes." Daniel moved to stand beside Alina, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by the crowd or his father. "She's right, Father. What you did tonight was inexcusable." "You're taking her side." Gregory's voice cracked with disbelief. "Your own father." "I'm taking the side of human decency," Daniel replied quietly. "Something you taught me nothing about." Margaret Chen cleared her throat. "Mr. Whitmore, I believe you have a donation to make and an apology to offer." Gregory looked around the room, seeing no sympathy in the faces that watched him. These people, his peers, his supposed friends, were all waiting to see if Gregory Whitmore was a man of his word or just another wealthy hypocrite. Double quotes, he began, then stopped. His entire worldview, built on hierarchies of worth based on wealth. An appearance had crumbled in the span of 15 minutes. "I apologize," he said finally, the words seeming to physically pain him. "I was wrong." Louder, someone from the crowd called out. "We all need to hear it." Gregory's face flushed, deep red. "I apologize to Ms. Kovac, Vasquez, ... For my prejudiced assumptions and cruel behavior. I will make the donation as promised." "And the scholarship fund?" Alina prompted. "Yes," Gregory said through gritted teeth. "The scholarship fund, as..." "Well, but Alina wasn't finished. I want something else, Mr. Whitmore. I want a position on the board that oversees that fund, to ensure it actually helps those it's meant to help." The audacity of the request sent murmurs through the crowd. Board positions in Whitmore foundations were coveted, powerful positions. "That's going too far," Gregory began. "Is it?" Daniel interrupted. "After what you just put her through, after what you've revealed about yourself, I think it's the least you can do." He turned to the crowd. "In fact, I propose that Ms. Vasquez be offered the position of artist-in-residence here at the Meridian. God knows we could use someone with her talent and perspective." Margaret Chen smiled broadly. "I second that proposal." All in favor. The response was overwhelming. Nearly everyone in the room raised their hands, some enthusiastically. Others perhaps motivated by not wanting to be seen as supporting Gregory's prejudices. Alina felt overwhelming emotions wash over her. After 18 years of hiding, of accepting, whatever work she could find, of believing her worth as an artist had ended with her condition. She was being offered not just redemption, but a future. "There's something else," she said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "I want to tell you all why I disappeared." The room fell silent again, everyone leaning in to hear the story. 18 years ago, I developed focal dystonia, a neurological condition that affects fine motor control. For a pianist, it's usually career-ending. I lost everything: my contracts, my health insurance, my savings trying to find treatment. But worse than the financial loss was the way the music world turned its back on me. I went from being the future of classical music to being invisible, disposable. She paused, looking directly at Gregory. I learned what it meant to be judged. Not by my talent or my contributions, but by my circumstances. I took whatever work I could find, cleaning offices, washing dishes, anything to survive. And everywhere I went, I encountered people like you, Mr. Whitmore, people who saw a uniform and made assumptions about my worth as a human being. But you just played, someone called out. How? Alina smiled, a real smile that transformed her face. 18 years of adapting, of finding new ways to create music despite my limitations. I never stopped practicing, never stopped loving music. I just stopped believing anyone would want to hear it from someone like me, middle-aged woman of color with a neurological condition, working as a janitor. Daniel stepped forward. Would you have dinner with me? The request was so unexpected, so earnest, that several people laughed, but not unkindly. Alina looked at him, this young man who had stood up to his father, who had seen her humanity when others saw only her uniform. Why? Because, Daniel said simply, I want to learn from someone who understands what real strength looks like. Someone who kept their dignity and their art alive despite everything the world threw at them. Gregory made a sound of disgust. You pursue this. You're out of the company, out of the family trust, out of everything. Daniel didn't hesitate. Then I'm out. He turned to Alina. I'd rather build something new with someone who understands the value of struggle than inherit an empire built on prejudice. The crowd erupted in discussion, but Alina raised her hand, and surprisingly, everyone quieted. Mr. Whitmore, she addressed Daniel formally. I appreciate your gesture, but I'm not interested in being anyone's rebellion against their father. However, she smiled. I would be happy to have coffee with someone who's willing to learn and grow. We'll see where things go from there. She turned back to Gregory. As for you, Mr. Whitmore, I want you to know something. Your prejudice didn't just hurt me tonight. It revealed to everyone here, including your son, exactly who you are beneath the expensive suit and the charitable donations. You've lost more than a bet tonight. You've lost the respect of everyone in this room, and more importantly, you've lost your son not because of me, but because of who you chose to be. With that, Alina walked back to her maintenance cart, but Margaret Chen intercepted her. Where are you going? Margaret asked. To finish my shift, Alina replied. I'm still employed here, and I believe in completing my responsibilities. Not anymore, Margaret said firmly. From now on, the only responsibilities you have in this building involve that piano. We'll discuss salary and details tomorrow, but tonight, I want you to stay as our guest of honor. The rest of the evening became legend in Chicago's cultural circles. Alina gave an impromptu concert, playing pieces she hadn't performed publicly in almost 2 decades, each one telling a story of struggle, survival, and ultimately, triumph. Gregory Whitmore left shortly after the confrontation, his empire beginning to crumble as word of his behavior spread through social media and news outlets. Within a month, he would be forced to resign from multiple boards, his reputation in tatters. Daniel, true to his word, walked away from the family fortune. He started a non-profit organization dedicated to providing instruments and training to underprivileged youth, with Alina as his primary advisor. Their coffee meetings evolved into a deep friendship and eventually, 2 years later, into something more. But that night, as Alina played and the rain finally stopped, leaving the windows clear to reflect the light of the chandeliers and the faces of an audience witnessing redemption, the most important transformation wasn't external. It was Alina's reclaiming of herself not just as an artist, but as a woman who refused to let prejudice, disability, or circumstance define her worth. Marcus Williams, a janitor who had worked alongside Alina for the past 6 weeks, approached her during a break in the performance. I knew there was something special about you, he said quietly. The way you moved, the way you looked at that piano every night when you thought no one was watching. Elena smiled. Why didn't you say anything, Coz? Marcus replied with, wisdom earned from his own struggles. Sometimes people need to reveal themselves in their own time, in their own way. Tonight was your time. As the evening wound down, Elena found herself at the piano one more time, but this time Daniel sat beside her on the bench. Teach me, he said simply. It takes years of practice, Elena warned. Dedication, frustration, failure. I'm not afraid of hard work, Daniel replied. Not anymore. Elena placed his hands on the keys, adjusting his fingers with the patience of a master teacher. Then we begin with the basics. Middle C. As she guided his fingers through the first simple scales, Elena thought about the strange path that had brought her here. 18 years of hiding had ended not with a planned revelation, but with a moment of standing up to prejudice. She had lost her first career to circumstances beyond her control. But she had found something more valuable, the strength to rebuild, to adapt, to survive, and ultimately, to thrive. You know what the irony is? Daniel said as he struggled with a basic chord progression. What's that? My father spent his whole life believing that worth came from birthright, from money, from the right connections. But real worth, real value, it comes from this, doesn't it? From persistence in the face of adversity, from creating beauty despite pain, from maintaining dignity when the world tries to strip it away. Elena nodded, adjusting his hand position. Your father learned that tonight, the hard way. Will you ever forgive him? Daniel asked. Elena considered the question. Forgiveness isn't about him. It's about me not carrying the weight of his prejudice, but forgetting. Never. People like your father need to be remembered. Their actions need to be remembered. So we can recognize and fight against that kind of cruelty whenever we encounter it. As they continued the lesson, the Meridian Concert Hall gradually emptied, but the security guards, following Margaret's instructions, let them stay. The sound of Daniel's hesitant scales, mixed with Elena's patient corrections, echoed through the space. A simple melody that spoke of new beginnings. 3 months later, the Gregory Whitmore Music Education Fund held its first fundraiser. Gregory himself was notably absent, but his money was there, legally bound by the agreement he'd made that fateful night. Elena, as a board member, ensured that every dollar went to students who, like her, had talent but lacked resources. Students who might be overlooked because of their color, their economic status, or their physical challenges. The fund's first recipient was a 12-year-old girl named Aisha, who'd been practicing on a broken keyboard in her apartment, teaching herself from YouTube videos. When Elena presented her with a full scholarship to the Meridian's youth program, along with access to proper instruments, Aisha burst into tears. They told me I'd never be a real musician, Aisha said through her tears. That people like me don't do classical music. Elena knelt down, looking the girl in the eyes. People told me the same thing. They were wrong then, and they're wrong now. The only person who gets to decide what you can become is you. And even when the world tries to stop you, even when your own body betrays you, you find a way. You adapt. You survive. You overcome. As Aisha played her first notes on a real piano, her face lighting up with joy and possibility, Elena felt a completeness she hadn't experienced since before her condition struck. This was her true purpose, not just to perform, but to ensure that prejudice and circumstance wouldn't rob another generation of their dreams. Daniel, watching from the doorway, caught Elena's eye and smiled. They had built something beautiful from the ashes of that confrontation, not just a program or a relationship, but a movement that challenged the very foundations of who was allowed to create art, who was deemed worthy of support, who got to be seen and heard. The story of that night at the Meridian spread far beyond Chicago. Videos of Elena's performance, secretly recorded by multiple attendees, went viral. News outlets picked up the story. Legendary pianist emerges from 18 years of hiding to confront prejudice. But Alina refused most interview requests. She had said what she needed to say that night. Now, she preferred to let her music and her work speak for themselves. A year later, Alina performed at Carnegie Hall for the first time in 19 years. The concert was sold out in minutes, with critics calling it the comeback of the century. But for Alina, the real triumph wasn't the standing ovation or the glowing reviews. It was the section of seats she had reserved for her students' kids who might never have set foot in Carnegie Hall if not for the fund. If not for that night when prejudice met its match in the form of a woman who refused to be diminished. Gregory Whitmore, now living in relative obscurity after his business empire crumbled, watched the concert on a live stream from his modest apartment. He had lost everything: his company, his society friends, his family. Daniel hadn't spoken to him since that night. As he watched Alina command the stage, watched the joy on the faces of the young musicians she had mentored, he was forced to confront the truth he had spent a lifetime avoiding. That worth had nothing to do with the circumstances of birth or the size of a bank account. He wrote a letter that night, addressed to Alina. It would take him 3 weeks to find the courage to send it. Ms. Vasquez, it read, I don't expect forgiveness, nor do I deserve it. But I wanted you to know that your triumph that night didn't just reveal my prejudices, it shattered them. I see now what my son saw immediately, that true nobility isn't inherited or purchased. It's earned through perseverance, grace under pressure, and the courage to stand up to people like the man I was. You asked me once if I understood my place. I didn't then. I do now. My place is to learn, to grow, and to spend whatever time I have left trying to undo some of the damage my ignorance has caused. Thank you for the lesson, however painful it was to learn. Alina read the letter once, then filed it away. She had more important things to focus and a new generation of musicians to train. A son-in-law to continue teaching. Daniel had proposed 6 months after that first night. In the same hall where they'd met, at the same piano, and a life to live fully, openly, without apology or shame. The Meridian Concert Hall installed a plaque near the piano where Lena had played that transformative night. It read, Music has no color, no class, no limitations except those we impose upon it. Let all who enter here judge only by the beauty of the sound and the passion of the performance. But perhaps the most fitting tribute came from Aisha, who, 5 years later, won her first major competition. In her acceptance speech, she said, My teacher, Alina Vasquez, taught me that our circumstances don't define our potential. She showed me that even when the world tries to silence you, your music, your truth, will find a way to be heard. She taught me that the greatest rebellion against prejudice isn't anger or revenge. It's excellence. It's persistence. It's refusing to accept the limitations others try to place on you. As Alina watched from the audience, her hand intertwined with Daniel's, she thought about this strange journey that had brought her here. The condition that had destroyed her first career still affected her. She had good days and bad days. Times when her left hand cooperated and times when it didn't. But she had learned to work with it, not against it, to see it not as a limitation, but as a teacher that had forced her to become more creative, more adaptive, more resilient. The next morning, Alina arrived at the Meridian early, as she always did. But instead of heading to the concert hall, she stopped by the maintenance office where her former colleagues were preparing for their shift. Ms. Vasquez, Marcus called out warmly, What brings you to our humble corner? I wanted to remind you all about the staff concert next month, Alina said. I expect to see everyone there performing, not just watching. But we're not musicians. One of the younger workers protested. Alina smiled, the same smile she'd given Gregory Whitmore that night 2 years ago. Neither was I, according to some people. But here's what I learned. We're all musicians. Some of us just haven't found our instruments yet. She spent the next hour with them, showing them basic rhythms. On makeshift drums, teaching them to find melody in everyday sounds. It was a different kind of performance, a different kind of teaching. But it carried the same message she'd been spreading since that transformative night, that everyone has worth. Everyone has something beautiful to contribute, if only there. Given the chance and the encouragement to try, as the months turned to years, the Gregory Whitmore Music Education Fund grew into a national program with chapters in 20 cities. Alina served as its artistic director, traveling the country to identify and nurture talent in unexpected places, community centers in struggling neighborhoods, rural schools with no music programs, juvenile detention centers where kids had been written off by society. Each time she discovered a new talent, each time she saw the light of possibility ignite in a young person's eyes, she thought of that night at the Meridian. The night when Gregory Whitmore's prejudice had inadvertently created an opportunity for transformation, not just for her, but for hundreds of young musicians who might otherwise have been overlooked. Daniel, who had become a successful advocate for arts education, often accompanied her on these trips. Their partnership, both personal and professional, had become a model for how privilege could be used in service of equity, how those born to advantage could leverage that advantage to create opportunities for others. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Daniel surprised Alina with a gift. He had tracked down and purchased the piano from the original venue, where she'd had her last performance before the dystonia struck, the night her first career had ended. It now sat in their home, restored to its original beauty. "I thought you might want to make new memories with it," he said. Alina sat at the piano, her fingers tracing the keys with reverence. Then she began to play not Rachmaninoff, this time, but an original composition she'd been working on. It was a piece that told her story in music. The early triumph, the sudden loss, the years of hiding, the moment of confrontation, and finally, the joy of rediscovery and purpose. As the last notes faded, Daniel asked, "What will you call it?" Alina thought for a moment, then smiled. "The Silent Symphony. For all those years when the music lived only inside me, when I thought no one would ever hear it again. And for all the people out there whose symphonies are still silent, waiting for their moment to be heard." The piece would eventually be performed by orchestras around the world, becoming an anthem for those who had been silenced by circumstance, prejudice, or fate. But that night, it was just Alina and Daniel in their home, surrounded by photos of the students they'd helped, the lives they'd changed, the world they were slowly but steadily making better. The story could have ended there, with triumph and transformation, love and purpose. But life, Alina had learned, didn't really have endings, just transitions. New movements in an ongoing composition. 10 years after that night at the Meridian, Alina received an unexpected visitor. Gregory Whitmore, now in his 70s and in failing health, came to one of her concerts. He sat in the back, trying to be invisible. But Alina spotted him immediately. After the performance, she found him waiting by the stage door. "I didn't think you'd want to see me," he said, his voice a shadow of its former authority. "I didn't think I would either," Alina admitted. "But here you are. I wanted to tell you, before it's too late, that you were right. About everything. I spent my whole life believing that worth was something you were born with or earned through wealth. You showed me it was something else entirely, something I never had, despite all my money and power." Alina studied him, this man who had tried to humiliate her, who had inadvertently changed her life. "Mr. Whitmore, do you know what the difference is between you and me?" He shook his head. "When I lost everything, I learned that my worth wasn't in what I could do or what I had achieved. It was in who I chose to be when everything was stripped away. You're learning that lesson now, late, but maybe not too late. Is there ... Is there any chance of reconciliation? With Daniel? The question came out broken, desperate. That's not for me to decide. But I can tell you this: Daniel values actions over words. If you want a relationship with your son, show him you've changed through what you do, not what you say. Gregory nodded, understanding. He turned to leave, then paused. The fund. It's helped a lot of kids. 843 at last count, Alina confirmed. Good, he said simply. That's good. As Alina watched him walk away, a broken man trying to find redemption, she felt an unexpected sense of closure. Not forgiveness exactly, but something like understanding. Everyone had their struggles, their prejudices to overcome, their lessons to learn. Some learned them early, through empathy and observation. Others, like Gregory, learned them late, through loss and humiliation. But the learning itself, that was what mattered. The final scene of this story takes place not in a concert hall or a boardroom, but in a small community center on the south side of Chicago. Alina, now in her 50s, sat with a group of children, all from backgrounds that the Gregory Whitmores of the world would have dismissed as worthless. But she saw what others missed: the rhythm in their restlessness, the melody in their chatter, the potential symphony in their chaotic energy. Music, she told them, as she had told hundreds of children before them, doesn't care where you come from. It doesn't care what you look like or how much money your parents have. All it cares about is this. She placed her hand over her heart. What you feel here, and this, she touched her temple, how hard you're willing to work here. One little boy, maybe 7 years old, raised his hand. Ms. V, were you always a famous piano player? Alina smiled, thinking of her journey: the triumph, the fall, the hiding, the revelation, the rebuilding. No, sweetheart. 4.